They laughed at her just because she was a black girl. They called her names, mocked her hair, and told her to go back to where she came from, even though she was born right here. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. The same kids who once bullied her ended up cheering for her. This story will give you chills. The room went silent. Not a dramatic, movie-like silence. The kind of silence that hangs heavy and awkward, like everyone just realized something was different. 14-year-old Amara stood frozen in the doorway of her new classroom, a backpack nearly bigger than her back, nervous hands gripping the straps. Her heart thumping louder than the clock ticking on the wall. She had been in new schools before, too many of them. But this time was different. She could feel it in her gut. Dozens of unfamiliar faces turned to look at her. Eyes scanned her from head to toe. Some were curious, others were cold, a few were outright rude. Her teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, smiled politely. "Everyone, this is Amara. She's just moved here and she'll be joining us for the rest of the school year. Let's give her a warm welcome." But no one clapped, no one smiled, they just stared. Amara shuffled forward, her sneakers squeaking, against the freshly waxed floors. She found her seat, far in the back, next to a boy who slowly moved his backpack closer to him, as if he didn't want her touching it. She sat down without a word. She had hoped this school would be different. A new beginning, a place where she could finally just be herself. But the looks told her everything she needed to know. She wasn't just the new girl. She was the black girl in a sea of white faces, and some of them didn't like it. As the teacher turned back to the board, Amara heard whispers. "Quick, sharp, slippery. Why's her hair like that? Did you see her skin? She's so dark. Do you think she even speaks English?" Amara's cheeks burned. She looked down at her desk and wished it would swallow her whole. Just when she thought it couldn't get worse, a boy from 2 rows leaned toward another and whispered, loud enough for Amara to hear, "Looks like the jungle sent us a visitor." A few students stifled laughs. One girl giggled behind her hand like it was the funniest joke in the world. Amara's throat tightened. Her fingers clenched under the desk, but she didn't say anything. She didn't dare say anything, because when you're the only one who looks like you learn real fast that speaking up can make things worse. At lunch, she sat alone. Not because she wanted to, because every table she walked past either ignored her or gave her that awkward, forced smile. The kind people wear when they're uncomfortable and don't want to get involved. She took out her homemade lunch, jollof rice and grilled chicken her mom had packed with love. The smell reminded her of home, of warmth, of family. But a voice rang out from the next table. "What is that smell?" "You." Another laugh. Another comment. "Dude, it looks like dog food." Amara closed the lid. Her appetite disappeared. Later that day in English class, the teacher asked a question about the book they were reading. Amara raised her hand. Carefully. Cautiously. "Yes." "Amara?" She cleared her throat. "I think the main character is struggling with identity because they feel caught between 2 worlds." Her voice was soft but clear, thoughtful, but instead of praise, someone snickered. "Wow, she can talk?" Another voice joined in. "You trying to sound smart or something?" More laughter. The teacher ignored it, moved on, but Amara felt her eyes sting. She blinked back the tears. At home, her mom greeted her with a warm hug. "How was your first day, baby?" Amara hesitated. She wanted to lie. Say fine. Shrug it off like she always did. But today had been especially cruel. She looked into her mother's tired eyes, eyes that had seen too much pain and sacrifice, and said quietly, "It was okay. Just different." Her mom kissed her forehead. "New places take time, but remember who you are. You're smart, you're strong, and there's nothing wrong with being different." Amara nodded. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her room was small, the walls bare except for a few taped-up sketches she had drawn back home. Drawings of powerful women, queens, warriors, all with deep brown skin like hers. She reached for her sketchbook, opened it, and drew, not to forget, but to survive. Because even though the world seemed to be laughing at her, she still had her voice. And one day, just maybe, that voice would be heard. Every day got worse. What started with stares and whispers soon turned into open mockery. By the end of her first week, Amara had already memorized the routine. Come to school, keep her head down, pretend not to hear, pretend not to care. But she did care. Deeply. At lunchtime, Amara would sit quietly at the edge of the cafeteria, usually alone. She brought her food from home, a warm, spicy meal her mother made with love every morning before work. It reminded her of comfort, of culture, of the family traditions that kept her grounded. But the other kids didn't see it that way. One afternoon, she opened her lunchbox to a strong aroma of jollof rice and chicken. Before she could even take a bite, a girl across from her leaned over with a disgusted look on her face. "What is that smell?" she sneered loudly. Another girl laughed. "Is that even real food? That looks like it came from the garbage." The girls at the table burst into laughter, glancing back at Amara as if she were part of a comedy show. Amara closed her lunchbox without a word. She wasn't even hungry anymore. She wrapped the food back up carefully, as if trying to protect it, not just from the mockery, but from the shame they tried to stick on it. She never brought that dish to school again. In the classroom, things weren't much better. Amara had always been a good student, curious, quick-thinking, and respectful. She liked literature, loved science, and had a genuine hunger to learn. But each time she raised her hand or shared an idea, the same voices found ways to cut her down. Once, when answering a question about the class novel, Amara explained her thoughts with confidence. "I think the character is isolated because he feels misunderstood," she said. Before the teacher could respond, a boy snorted. "You sound like a cartoon character or something," another whispered. "She thinks she's smart, huh?" And just like that, the moment she was proud of turned into another embarrassment. Even when she got the highest grade on a quiz, someone muttered, "Must have cheated. No way she's smarter than the rest of us." The laughter always stung more. Than the words, Amara tried harder to stay invisible. She stopped speaking in class unless called on. She began to shrink into her seat, and still, the taunts followed. During gym class, the humiliation continued in silence. When it was time to choose teams for dodgeball or relay races, Amara was always picked last, if at all. She could feel the dread build up in her chest every time the captains began choosing. The worst part wasn't even being left out. It was the way they looked past her, as if she wasn't even there. No one wanted to be her partner. No one wanted her to be part of the group. It was in those moments, standing alone while the others huddled, laughed, and talked, that Amara began to wonder if maybe they were right about her. Maybe she didn't belong here, but it got even more personal. One afternoon, Amara went to her locker and found a folded piece of notebook paper tucked between the slats. At first, she thought it might be from a teacher or a classmate, maybe someone being kind. But when she opened it, her heart dropped. It said in rough, sloppy handwriting, "Go back to Africa. No name, no explanation, just cruel, ugly hatred." She stood there, frozen, the note trembling in her fingers. It didn't matter that she was born in the U.S., that she knew nothing but this country, this language, this life. To them, she didn't belong. She crumpled the paper in her hand and shoved it deep into her backpack. That night, at home, her mom asked how her day went, just like she always did, every single evening at the dinner table. And just like always, Amara forced a small smile and shrugged. "It's fine," she said quietly. Her mom looked at her with concern. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Amara hesitated. She wanted to tell her. She wanted to say everything. The jokes, the comments, the way they looked at her, the notes, the names. But all she could whisper was, "It's just kids being kids." Her mom reached over and squeezed her hand. "If something's wrong, you can tell me. You don't have to hold it in." Amara nodded, but she didn't say anything else. She went to bed early that night. Her room was dimly lit, the soft hum of the city outside her window, only sound. She lay under the covers, curled up, her pillow damp with tears that slipped out silently. She cried for the things they said. She cried for how it made her feel, small, unwanted, invisible. She cried for the food she used to love, but now felt ashamed of. She cried because she didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending that everything was okay. But most of all, Amara cried because part of her was starting to believe that maybe they were right. And that was the cruelest part of all. It was supposed to be just another awful day. Amara woke up that morning dreading school, just like she always did. The same routine, the same quiet walk down the halls, the same effort to shrink herself, to avoid attention. She had learned how to make herself invisible, how to move like a shadow between the laughter and the comments that never seemed to stop. But something was different today, not in the world around her, but inside. A tiny voice had been growing, louder in her chest for weeks, a voice she had tried to silence, a voice that whispered, "Enough." That voice began to stir again during third period. Art class. Ms. Foster, the art teacher, stood in front of the class with her usual spark of energy and clapped her hands. "Today we're going to do something different," she said. "You're going to paint something that represents you. Not just what you like, but who you are." There were groans and mumbled complaints. Some students picked up their brushes with blank faces and began lazily dabbing color on their canvases. One boy started drawing a soccer ball. A girl painted a sunset with pink clouds. Amara stared at her blank canvas for a long time. She could feel the weight of her classmates' energy, the light-hearted chatter, the jokes being passed around, none of which ever seemed to include her. But then she looked down at the brush in her hand, then at the paints lined up neatly on the table. Her fingers trembled at first, unsure. Then they steadied. She dipped the brush into the black paint, then red, then gold. She didn't sketch. She didn't overthink. She painted. Each stroke was heavy with emotion. The brush moved like it had a life of its own. The figure on the canvas began to take shape. A girl with deep brown skin standing in the middle of a furious storm, lightning crashing around her, rain pouring down. And yet, she stood tall. On her head was a crown made of flames, burning bright against the storm. The background swirled with dark blues and purples, the kind of colors that spoke of chaos, pain, and power. But the figure didn't bend. She stood with her chin up and her eyes wide open. Amara didn't even notice how quiet the room had gotten until Ms. Foster walked over and said gently, "Would you like to share your piece with the class?" Amara blinked, suddenly aware that every eye in the room was now on her. Normally, she would have said no. Normally, she would have kept her head down, but not today. She stood up. For a moment, her voice caught in her throat. But then, just like the fire she had painted, her words ignited. "This is how I feel," she began, her voice soft at first, then stronger. "Every day I come to school and people laugh at me. They make fun of my hair, my skin, my food, my voice. Just for being who I am." She looked around the room. No one laughed now. No one whispered. "But I'm not weak. I'm not just the girl you ignore or mock. I'm fire. I've survived storms. I've learned how to keep standing, even when everything around me tells me to fall. And no matter what anyone says," she paused. Her chest rose and fell with emotion. "I am proud to be black. Silence. Complete, utter silence. The kind that doesn't come from awkwardness, but from being stunned." No one had expected that from the quiet girl in the back of the room. No one had expected her to speak, to rise, to burn. Amara slowly sat back down, her hands shaking slightly under the desk. Then something unexpected happened. A single clap came from the other side of the room. Then another, then another. Within seconds, half the class was clapping. Not out of politeness, but out of respect. Even students who had ignored her for weeks looked at her now with new eyes. Ms. Foster placed a hand on Amara's shoulder and said, "Thank you for sharing something so powerful." That took real courage. Amara nodded, but inside, she was still trying to understand what had just happened. For the first time in weeks, her voice hadn't been ignored or mocked. It had been heard. After class, as students filed out, a girl stopped by Amara's desk. She didn't say much, just 2 words. "Thank you." And then she walked away. Amara looked at her painting again. The girl in the storm, her face, her fire. It wasn't just a creation. It was a reflection. For the first time, Amara felt like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to hide anymore. Not her voice, not her art, not herself. That evening, she walked home a little taller. Her steps didn't feel as heavy. She couldn't explain it exactly, but something inside her had changed. And though the world outside might not have softened just yet, something inside her had hardened in the best way. The storm wasn't over, but now she had learned how to stand in it and burn brighter than ever before. At first, no one spoke. The room held its breath. Students looked around, unsure of how to react to what they had just heard. Amara stood silently by her painting, her heart pounding in her chest. She braced herself for the laughter, the whispers, the usual dismissal, but instead there was a single clap, then another, and another. The rhythm of hands clapping slowly grew louder, until suddenly the whole class was on their feet. The sound echoed off the walls. Even the students who had once ignored her or whispered behind her back now stood, applauding her courage, her truth, and her fire. Ms. Foster smiled with tears brimming in her eyes. She walked over, took Amara's painting, and held it up for the whole class to see. "This," she said softly, "is what art is for. This is what truth looks like." That afternoon, Ms. Foster asked Amara if it would be okay to display her painting on the main artboard in the school's front hallway. Amara hesitated for a moment, part of her still unsure about standing in the spotlight, but then she nodded. "Okay," she said, "let it be seen." By the end of the day, her painting was mounted front and center under the bright hallway lights. The black girl with the flaming crown stood tall for everyone to see. Powerful, unbending, proud, and people noticed. The next morning, as Amara walked down the hallway toward her locker, she heard someone call her name. It was Lily, one of the girls who used to sit near her at lunch but never said a word. Lily approached slowly, eyes soft with guilt. "Hey," she said, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how bad it was. What you said in class, that was brave. Really brave." Amara blinked, surprised. She managed a small smile. "Thank you." Lily nodded awkwardly and walked away. But it didn't end there. By lunchtime, 2 more students had come up to Amara to compliment her painting. One even asked if she'd teach them how to use color like that. In gym class, a girl who usually picked everyone but Amara for team sports asked her to join her group. This wasn't pity, this was respect. For the first time since she arrived, Amara felt something shift. She wasn't a punchline anymore. She wasn't background noise. She was being seen. Really seen. Later that evening, Ms. Foster approached Amara before she left school. She gently asked, "Would it be all right if I shared your painting and—" "What you said online, a lot of people could learn from your voice." Amara hesitated again. This felt bigger than a classroom, bigger than a hallway. She thought of her mom, of the nights she cried herself to sleep, of the silence she had lived in for too long. Then she nodded. "Yes," she said, "but only if my name's on it." Ms. Foster smiled wide. "Of course." That night. The post went up. A photo of the painting, followed by a caption that quoted Amara's words. "Every day I'm made fun of for the color of my skin, for my hair, for just being who I am. But I'm not weak. I'm fire." By the next morning, the post had over 20,000 likes. By the next afternoon, it had over $100,000. Within 48 hours, the number climbed past 500,000 views. Comments flooded in from people all over the country, some from teachers, some from students, others from strangers who just needed something to believe in that day. "You're a queen." "I showed this to my daughter. She cried." "Thank you." "I wish I had your courage when I was in school." "You're not alone. You never were." Amara scrolled through the messages with wide eyes. She couldn't believe what she was reading. She handed the phone to her mom, who gasped and put a hand over her heart. "They see you," she whispered. "They finally see you." The messages kept coming. A local news station reached out, asking if Amara would be willing to do a short interview. Then a national education blog shared her story. A few days later, a popular YouTuber, someone Amara had actually followed for years, made a reaction video about her painting, calling her the future of strength and beauty. Suddenly, everything was different. Amara wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just the black girl in the back row. She was Amara, the artist, the truth teller, the girl with the fire crown who stood up in her storm and dared to speak. Her classmates looked at her with new eyes now. The hallways were no longer places of dread. People waved, smiled, asked about her artwork, her favorite colors, her story. One teacher invited her to speak at the school assembly. Another offered to help her apply for a summer art program. Thaseng? Hate hadn't disappeared entirely. She still noticed the occasional side-eye, heard the odd whisper, but they didn't hurt the same way anymore, because now Amara knew who she was. She had found her voice. And once you've found your voice, once you've stood tall in front of the storm and dared to speak, it's impossible to go back, to silence. Amara wasn't just surviving anymore. She was rising, and the world was watching. The change didn't happen all at once. It was subtle at first, like a sunrise slowly pushing away the dark. But it was real, and it grew. The same kids, who had once laughed at Amara, who had whispered behind her back or openly mocked her, now paused when they saw her in the hallway. Some nodded awkwardly. Others tried to strike up conversations. A few were genuinely curious, even nervous, as if unsure how to speak to someone they had underestimated for so long. And to Amara's own surprise, she didn't turn away. She didn't. Forget the things they said. The cruel jokes, the hurtful notes in her locker, the isolation. But she didn't carry it like a weight anymore. Instead, she carried it like a lesson. A reminder of who she used to be and who she had become. One day, after her painting went viral and the messages kept pouring in from people all over the country, the school invited her to speak at the next assembly. The principal, who had barely known her name before, now introduced her as a courageous young leader with a powerful voice. Amara stood on stage, looking out at the sea of faces that once blurred together in silence or laughter at her expense. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. She spoke about bullying, about identity, about what it means to be different and strong. Being different doesn't make you less, she said. It just makes you you, and the world needs every kind of you there is. The applause afterward wasn't polite. It was thunderous. Students came up to her after the assembly. Some shared stories of their own struggles. Others simply said, "Thank you." One girl, with tears in her eyes, said she had almost dropped out of school but changed her mind after hearing Amara speak. That was the moment Amara realized she wasn't just sharing her story anymore. She was helping others find their own. With her teacher's encouragement, she started an art club. It was a small group at first, but it grew quickly. Students from every background came. Kids who loved to draw, paint, sculpt, or just sit and be surrounded by creativity. Amara called it the free space, a place where no one would be judged for their color, their culture, their voice, or their ideas. In that room, people opened up. Walls came down. A boy from the football team painted a portrait of his grandmother who had raised him. A shy girl from math club sketched a galaxy with planets that all looked like people of different skin tones. There was laughter. There were tears. And there was healing. One afternoon, as Amara was setting up paints before the club started, someone walked into the room quietly. She turned and froze. It was Jason. Jason had been one of the worst. He was the boy who called her names when she first walked into the classroom. The one who laughed the loudest when someone made fun of her accent, even though there was nothing wrong with the way she spoke. He stood there for a moment, awkwardly shifting his weight, hands buried in his hoodie. "I was wrong," he said. Finally, his voice low but steady. "I said stuff that hurt you, and I didn't even think about what it meant. I just followed what everyone else was doing. But that's no excuse. I'm sorry." Amara looked at him for a long moment. Part of her wanted to stay silent, to make him feel the rejection she had once felt. But she didn't, because she wasn't that girl anymore. "I forgive you," she said. His shoulders relaxed just a little. "Thanks." He turned to leave, but paused. "Your painting? It changed the way I see things." As he walked out, Amara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need to get even. What she had now was far greater: growth, respect, and her voice. That was the most powerful thing of all. At home, her mother noticed the change too. She no longer had to ask Amara how school was. The way Amara spoke, with excitement, with hope, told her everything she needed to know. She smiled every time Amara showed her a new drawing or read a message from someone who had seen her story online. "You turned pain into purpose," her mom said one night as they sat together on the couch. "I always knew you had it in you." Amara leaned her head on her mother's shoulder and whispered, "I just had to remember it for myself." The viral post eventually became a news feature, then a podcast episode, then an invitation to speak at another school in a different city. She went, nervous but ready, and shared her journey again. And again, people listened. Amara's story wasn't just about bullying. It wasn't just about race. It was about being seen, about using your voice even when it shakes, about standing tall in the storm with a crown no one could take away. More schools reached out. Her art club inspired others to start their own free spaces. And everywhere she went, people remembered her not as the girl they once laughed at, but as the girl who helped them see differently. She didn't just change her own story. She helped others write theirs, and the girl who once sat alone in the lunchroom, she became the voice that inspired not just a school, but soon the world. If this story touched your heart or made you think differently, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this. And remember, your voice matters, your story matters, And you are never alone. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.